The story of Charlie Kirk's alleged killer begins not in the blaze of headlines or the flash of breaking news alerts, but in the quieter spaces that often precede tragedy. It begins with a man whose name was not familiar to most Americans, a man who lived in the margins of public attention until circumstances, and his own choices, thrust him into the spotlight. To understand what happened, and why, we must first understand who he was. The person accused of ending the life of one of the most outspoken political commentators of his generation was not a celebrity, not a politician, and not someone you'd expect to be tethered to national history. He was, in every sense, an ordinary figure, yet one whose path intersected fatefully with Kirk's. This documentary account seeks not to sensationalize, but to trace the contours of his life, his motives, and the chain of events that brought him into conflict with Charlie Kirk. The goal is not to excuse, nor to condemn prematurely, but to understand. Because behind every headline of crime, there lies a human story, sometimes painful, sometimes complex, always worth examining with care. The man accused of killing Charlie Kirk grew up far from the spotlight. His childhood unfolded in an ordinary town, quiet streets lined with modest homes, schools that hummed with the familiar rhythms of classrooms and playgrounds, and the steady beat of everyday American life. Neighbors remembered him as a boy who was, at times, withdrawn, prone to spending hours alone. His family, not particularly wealthy or influential, wrestled with the kinds of struggles that rarely make the news. Bills to pay, conflicts at the dinner table, the ups and downs of a household stretched thin. By his teenage years, cracks had begun to show. Friends came and went, and while some described him as intelligent and thoughtful, others noted a streak of anger simmering beneath the surface. Like many young men of his generation, he found the internet to be both an escape and an influence. Online communities, forums, and endless video clips became both his classroom and his battleground. He absorbed ideas, some constructive, some toxic, all contributing to the shaping of his worldview. Education was sporadic. He moved in and out of schools, sometimes performing well, other times falling behind. Teachers noted his sharp mind but also his lack of focus. He had potential, but it was often buried beneath apathy or bursts of resentment. As the years went on, the balance tipped more toward frustration than promise. The disconnection he felt from society seemed to deepen, creating a sense of alienation that would only grow more acute. By the time he reached adulthood, his life bore the marks of instability. Jobs came and went. Relationships frayed. His sense of identity seemed to hang in the balance, pulled in different directions by political polarization, personal disappointments, and a gnawing sense that he was on the outside looking in. What remained consistent, however, was his engagement with politics, not as a participant in organized movements, but as an observer and critic. His views hardened over time, sharpened by online debates and fueled by a conviction that the voices dominating public discourse did not reflect his own reality. Charlie Kirk, meanwhile, was rising. The young conservative activist had built Turning Point USA into a platform that amplified his message to millions. For Kirk, the college campuses of America were battlegrounds in a cultural war, and he embraced the fight with the zeal of a true believer. To his supporters, he was a defender of free speech and traditional values. To his critics, he was a provocateur, someone whose rhetoric often inflamed tensions. Kirk thrived in the spotlight, and as his profile grew, so too did the range of people who reacted strongly to him, both positively and negatively. It was against this backdrop that the alleged killer's attention began to focus on Kirk. Whether through speeches, online clips, or media appearances, Kirk became a figure the man could not ignore. At first, the engagement may have been casual, even detached. But gradually, Kirk's prominence and message struck deeper chords. The words he spoke became points of contention in the accused man's mind, fueling frustration that had long been simmering. To him, Kirk embodied not just an ideology, but an entire system of values and voices he felt alienated from. The seeds of obsession had been planted, though no one around him fully realized it at the time. Friends recalled conversations in which Kirk's name surfaced, often in heated tones. Social media activity hinted at fixations, with comments and reposts that revealed a mind preoccupied. The distance between disagreement and hostility narrowed, until eventually, it seemed the man's private grievances had fused with a public target. The path from discontent to violence is rarely straightforward. In the case of Kirk's alleged killer, it unfolded over months and years, in ways that may never be fully understood. What is clear is that isolation deepened. He became more reclusive, his world shrinking to the confines of his apartment, his computer, and the inner conversations of his own restless thoughts. Those who encountered him during this period noticed the change. His once intermittent bursts of sociability grew rarer. When he did speak, his tone was tinged with bitterness. Conversations circled back to politics, to grievances, to the belief that powerful voices were drowning out people like him. The more Kirk's star rose, the more the accused man seemed to feel the weight of exclusion. There were warning signs, though they were scattered. A heated argument at a local bar. A string of angry posts online. A friend who quietly stepped back after feeling uneasy about his intensity. None of these moments alone foretold what would come, but together, they painted a picture of a man sliding toward extremes. The investigation later revealed searches, notes, and online interactions that hinted at premeditation. Detectives traced digital footprints showing that Kirk's public appearances were closely monitored. Dates, times, and locations had been noted. There were drafts of unsent messages, rehearsals of grievances that seemed destined never to find resolution through dialogue. Instead, the focus narrowed onto one imagined solution: confrontation. When the day came, it unfolded swiftly. Kirk was speaking at an event, surrounded by supporters, cameras, and the routine energy of political theater. Foremost in attendance, it was just another evening in the ongoing churn of America's cultural battles. But for the accused, it was the culmination of years of frustration and fixation. The details of that night have been parsed and replayed in court documents, police reports, and media coverage. The shot that rang out cut through not only the room, but the nation's sense of security. In the aftermath, chaos reigned. Attendees scrambled for cover. Security rushed to subdue the suspect. Within moments, the alleged killer was in custody, his face pressed to the floor, the echo of his actions already reverberating far beyond the walls of that venue. Kirk, fatally struck, became the latest public figure to fall victim to political violence, a tragedy that once again forced America to grapple with the costs of polarization and rage. The arrest was only the beginning. From that moment forward, the man accused of killing Charlie Kirk became the subject of intense scrutiny. Every detail of his life was excavated by investigators and journalists alike. Neighbors were interviewed. Social media accounts were dissected. Employers, classmates, and acquaintances were asked to recount anything that might shed light on his state of mind. Court hearings began to chart the contours of the case. The defense painted a portrait of a man overwhelmed by personal struggles, arguing that mental health played a role. The prosecution, by contrast, emphasized premeditation, pointing to the digital trail and the deliberate actions leading up to the shooting. Somewhere between these narratives lay the messy reality of a man whose choices had culminated in irreversible violence. The broader public was left to process not only the loss of Charlie Kirk, but the unsettling truth that someone so seemingly ordinary could commit such an extraordinary act. Commentators debated what it said about the state of the nation, about rhetoric, about mental health, about security at political events. For some, the story reinforced the dangers of political extremism. For others, it raised questions about how society identifies and supports those who feel left behind. Meanwhile, the accused sat in custody, awaiting trial. His image, captured in mugshots and courtroom sketches, became instantly recognizable, though stripped of the anonymity he once lived in. In those images, observers sought clues: remorse, defiance, emptiness. Interpretations varied, but the reality was far simpler: a man now defined by a single violent act. The courtroom became the stage where his fate would be decided. Witnesses testified. Experts weighed in. Lawyers argued. And through it all, the accused sat silently, the focus of a nation's gaze. For some, he was a monster. For others, he was a cautionary tale. But for everyone, he was the man accused of silencing a voice that had loomed large in American politics. In the end, the story of Charlie Kirk's alleged killer is not just about one man, or even one victim. It is about the forces that converge in modern society: alienation, polarization, mental health, and the ways in which individuals channel their grievances. It is about how public figures, by the very nature of their visibility, become lightning rods for anger and obsession. And it is about the unpredictable paths that lead ordinary people to commit extraordinary crimes. The name of Kirk's accused killer will likely fade over time, overshadowed by the memory of his victim and by the ongoing debates that define the American political landscape. But the lessons remain. They remind us that violence does not emerge in a vacuum. It grows in silence, in isolation, in the spaces where anger festers unchecked. As the nation continues to process the tragedy, questions linger. Could it have been prevented? Were there missed opportunities for intervention? What might have changed if someone had reached him before it was too late? These are questions without easy answers, but they are questions that must be asked. Because at the heart of this story lies a sobering reality. One man's decision ended a life, altered countless others, and added another chapter to the long history of political violence in America. To understand him is not to absolve him, but to reckon with the forces that shaped his path, and to confront the uncomfortable truth that such forces remain present all around us.